Tom, we got a couple of places to start today, but maybe I should start with the announcement just now because I'm sure a lot of people, certainly business owners, happy to find out that the federal government has just announced they are going to give you an added year to pay back your Canada Emergency Business Account loan. That's a pretty big deal and for something a lot of people have been asking for.
And it's showing that the Liberals are back in the saddle after a very sleepy summer. They were shaken by some of the polling numbers. The most recent poll showing them 15 points behind the Conservatives. That's unknown territory for Justin Trudeau. So he was in fine form today. I caught his whole press conference, and he was doing announcements on housing, and they're just going to start rolling stuff out. They are the government, after all, and even though they're a minority government, thanks to their deal with the NDP, to act like a majority. So Trudeau's obviously still spoiling for a fight. He sees this as an epic battle between left and right, between himself and a lot of people would contest how far left they are, but let's leave that aside for now. That he just knows that he wants to have this battle with Poilievre if he does indeed decide to stick around. So he's going to start doing what he should have been doing all summer, which is taking advantage of the fact that he's the government and he gets to announce stuff.
Speaking of announcing, this is another, I don't know, you tell me, significant announcement or not, Brian?
Today, I'm announcing another big piece of our plan to build more housing. Canadians need more buildings intended for renters, not just condos that turn into Airbnbs that are sold to foreign buyers as financial assets. So we are going to be removing the federal GST for the construction of new apartment buildings, and I'm encouraging all provinces to do the same.
Okay. Significant, Tom?
It could be in the overall price because margins are not always that great on building that sort of thing. I also think that Trudeau hit so on that one, it's the continuation of what we saw in London yesterday, but let's bear in mind, according to the CMHC, we need 3.5 million new homes in Canada over the next 7 years. And the big announcement yesterday in London was for 2,000 units. Every single working day over the next 7 years, you'd have to announce 2,000 new units to get there. Yeah. So we're really far, but at least Trudeau is starting to show action, and this is a concrete thing. These are the types of things that the finance department can jingle around and find a way of putting forward. It's not going to affect budgets that much because it won't happen right away. So it's a sign that they're at least listening to people who are saying, look, on housing, you've gotten it completely wrong. You've fallen asleep. By the way, that was one of Trudeau's better moments because the journalists kept saying, well, why is it taking you so long? You've been talking about this since 2015. And then one of them said, well, Mr. Poilievre just said that you're copying him and this is a new idea. He said, well, you're going to have to make up your mind. Either I've had this idea since 2015 or I just stole it from Pierre Poilievre. So it was actually a pretty good line from Trudeau.
Shot.
I still feel like there's a major issue with the delivery of the message. Like even when he's giving good news, we're tired of him and we're tired of that teacherly tone. He needs to change his approach.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Natasha, because I actually heard a far more user-friendly tone. People have been working on Poilievre's tone, which was execrable, and they worked hard on it because it was like fingernails on a blackboard. And Trudeau has that, as you say, that preachy talk down tone that just drives everybody up the wall. And today it was a friendlier, much more natural Trudeau than I've heard in a long time. By the way, there's another piece in there that's going to get noticed. It has to do with a shot across the bow, I would say, of the big grocery chains in Canada. And his take was essentially, your profits don't make any sense. It has nothing to do with inflation. You guys are driving inflation, and I'm coming after you. And if he actually does it, it's going to start with meetings and the like, but there are laws, against this type of thing. We're supposed to have competition laws, but we don't enforce them very much in Canada, unlike the Americans. So we'll see whether Trudeau actually does something, but he's certainly sending a warning signal, and it's going to be picked up by the public, because all you have to do is go do your grocery shopping to realize that it far outstrips anything in terms of the supply chain costs that they keep referring to.
All right, let's talk provincial politics. We asked this as a question earlier on, Tom. This Quebec City CJAD decides to hold an English week. Great idea until someone mentioned to the government that there's a Quebec City CJAD holding an English week. The premier called it a bad idea. Every other catechist came out and basically, mirrored that. And then I'm not sure how this happened, but I didn't believe it when I first saw it. It turns out the Quebec Liberal Party not only said it was a bad idea, they doubled down. They asked the CJAD to cancel the event, to cancel English Week. And Natasha and I looked at each other going, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, and a little bit of demographics around this. I taught CJAD in Quebec City when I was up there, and there's an English CJAD. It was the St. Lawrence campus of Champlain, and it's still there. And I would guess, just based on what I was told at the time, 70% of our students, 75% were Francophones who in Quebec City have had very, very little chance to pick up English. And it's interesting, over the years, I met a bunch of those students. And, how's it going? Well, it made a big difference in my life, the ability to apply for jobs. And I'll say that even if you want to continue your university degrees, the minute you get in the upper echelons, maybe the undergrad you can get away with not too much English. The minute you're talking graduate school, it doesn't matter what subject you're in, the scientific literature, like it or not, is mostly in English around the world. In fact, in France, almost all of the scholarly articles today are written in English. So it's a simple reality. In Quebec City, there's very small Anglophone population. So if you're a good CJAD student and you want to get ahead, saying, okay, let's have some time when we're going to be speaking English to each other to get used to it and maybe practice a bit, that's a good thing. And it doesn't take anything away from these kids' knowledge of French. They work, they live, they're in the most French city in North America. It's far more French in Quebec City than it is in Montreal. So to quote one of my friends, it's a tempest in a teapot, who happens to be from Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. And, anybody who thinks about this stuff realizes that there's just so much that can be spent in terms of oxygen trying to get upset about these things when it's absolutely nothing. As for the Liberals, honestly, I go right back to when David Birnbaum brought in that amendment to say that English kids in an English CJAD should take 3 of their fill-in-the-blank, history, geography, geometry, physics classes in French. Even though they've already got French and they've learned enough through high school and they'll eventually get into the workplace and really pick that up, I could not have passed a course given in French when I was in CJAD. But by the time I got into the market, a few years later, I picked up that level of legal French very, very quickly. That's what happens. People just get into the workplace and they pick up whatever's missing. But then you're going to be holding them back by putting that in. That was the Liberal Party of Quebec. And it was such an incredibly stupid move. And now we hear André Fortin, their spokesperson today, saying, yes, this is a very bad idea for CJAD kids in Quebec City to speak English. So I just give up. Penalty flags all over the field. I literally give up on the Quebec Liberal Party.
Well, wow. And André Fortin in particular, I just feel like he was a potential candidate for the leader, not this time around, but he's someone down the road who you think might be a good person in that role. What's he doing? I mean, he's alienating himself from Anglophone
someone
voter.
Suggested in an email that the CAQ may have infiltrated the Quebec Liberal Party.
I don't think they had to infiltrate it, actually. I think it's doing it on its own.
That's fair.
But going back to André Fortin, this guy speaks English like the 3 of us.
Absolutely.
Not the slightest trace of an accent. And that's obviously given him certain advantages in life, too. So he doesn't want other kids in Quebec City, where there's very little English, to actually have a chance to pick it up. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
So just before we run out of time, Tom, I really want to get your thoughts on this, because we're going to be speaking to Marwa Risky after the 5:30 news. André Fortin has come out and said she should absolutely run. He himself chose not to run because he wants more family time. She has said clearly she wants to have a second children and her priorities are there for the moment. Why is he putting the pressure on?
I think he's signaling that, like a lot of other people in the Quebec Liberal caucus, he thinks that she's the best. Now, it's going to be very interesting to ask her about the Garneau CJAD and see what her answer is going to be. But it just shows that Fortin is sometimes right, because I tend to agree with him that in the caucus right now, she is absolutely the star.
She is.
But politics is very demanding, period. It's particularly demanding on women. And I think that she should be just allowed with Greg to make whatever decision they consider best for them and their family. But she's an absolute star. She's highly articulate. She's whip smart. And it must be very tempting for her. But, we'll see. I think that the smartest move for the Liberals would have been to replace Tanguay with her, and we wouldn't have things like people complaining about English Week in a French CJAD in Quebec City. Let her make her other choices as things come along, and then maybe, save that for another day. But we've got Mark Tanguay, and it's unbelievable.
Well, and I feel like she's ending up between a rock and a hard place, where she really isn't going to be able to make the choice she wants to make.
Okay, so we talked about this earlier. Why do you think she's not going to be? I mean, she ultimately will decide if she wants to run or not.
Yeah, but if the pressure's on that high, and it's coming from, like we said, Patrick Lagacé writing about it, all the other politicians saying she's the woman for the job, at some point it's going to be political suicide for her to not accept to run for the leadership.
Well, I don't know. I think the people can also admire somebody who just looks at this and says, not right now. Which is, by the way, when Fortin said that was my reaction to him. I was sort of going, good on you. You know, you're making that your priority. So it can just add to it. But in the meantime, if they could get Mark Tanguay to step aside and give it to Marwa Risky, I can just tell you would see the best question periods you've seen in a heck of a long time between her and Legault.
Yep, you're so
Tom,
right.
thank you so much. We'll talk to you again next week. Have a good one.